Dear friends, greetings and welcome to the discussion on global order post-Trump era, sponsored by IBAT, the think tank, that's Indian Bureau of Administrators and Technocrats. Dear friends, American policies impact India in many ways. Concerns in India is majorly about the dependability of United States as a security partner. The past few years have seen a considerable deepening of India-US relations in the military and strategic sphere. We in India are keen and interested to know how will Biden era be. Will it continue the international policies of Trump or will it be back to the Obama era? One may love or hate Trump era, but his era surely cannot be ignored. Trump, during his regime, had pointed out at the reality. He asked several uncomfortable questions about the failing American foreign policies. He asked, why was America still fighting wars in the Middle East and elsewhere? Why wasn't it partnering with Russia against the jihadis? Why was China allowed to abuse and overtake the America or abuse the rules of the game? And why were so-called allies in Europe allowed to place high tariffs on American produce while American workers had paid for their defense? Your friends, Trump had made allies to pay more for their own defense, led the global change in attitude against China, and kept the United States out of any new wars. He was successful in brokering deals in the Middle East to normalize the ties with Israel. He had new line of communication with North Korea. Dear friends, we have two eminent speakers and subject experts. The first speaker of our today's session is Dr. Dattesh D. Parulekar. He's a faculty member in International Relations and Strategic Studies at Department of International Relations, School of International and Area Studies, Goa University. His areas of specialization can span India's foreign policy and diplomacy, Latin American political economy, Chinese political economy, strategic maritime affairs with respect to the Indo-Pacific, etc. He was Fulbright Research Fellow in pursuance of his PhD and undertook a stint at Conflict Management Center of the School of Advanced International Studies, Johns Hopkins University, Washington, D.C., USA. He is a visiting faculty at most Indian defense institutions. Besides, he is also professionally involved with nationalist-minded think tanks in India. That is India Foundation New Delhi through its Indian Ocean conferences and the Kautilya Fellows program and the Forum for Integrated National Security, being the vice president of its Goa chapter, as also a resource person, mentor to their Young Scholars Forum initiative. With this brief introduction of Dr. Parulekar, I request him to deliver his lecture on the above topic. Welcome, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Shetty. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, yes.
Right, okay. So at the outset, let me express my profound pleasure at being able to join you and IBAT on this particular forum today, and also to be able to join a very dear friend and esteemed colleague in Dr. Nanda Kishor on this topic, which is extremely intriguing, very fascinating, and highly pertinent to our times. Now, before we get into the post-Trump era world order, let's try and understand what have been the profound transformations which have been happening over the last few years that has basically got us to this point. And quite clearly, since the global economic and financial crisis of 2008, we've seen a world order which is in constant unfoldment, in constant transformation, and therefore having embraced a kind of fluidity and flux like never before. And why do I say that? Because if you go back to the Cold War times, you can see very clearly a G2 formation where you had two global powers who virtually carved up the world into their spheres of influence. And for the large part, these spheres of influence were mutually exclusive of each other. So if you were an American ally, you couldn't have been a kind of a partner of the Soviet Union and vice versa. Since the end of the Cold War for almost 2 decades, we saw a kind of unipolar world where the US was clearly the runaway global power, but there were a number of different security challenges which the United States was facing, and the US really had nobody to fall back on. So it was a kind of a unipolar world order where, for right or wrong, the US would obviously have to share the global responsibility. And for the last 10 odd years, we are now seeing the emergence of another G2, this time between United States and China, but a G2 on very different terms. Because what we are seeing over the last 10 years is not a mutually exclusive world. If anything, the globalized world today is a world of amazing intertwining, interconnectedness, and interdependence. And it is this interconnectedness and interdependence which makes the world today complexly interdependent. And it is this complex interdependence in which we have to account for the new kind of great power rivalry which is emerging between the United States and China. I mean, just look, for example, at one stat. The US and China today are the largest trading, one of the largest trading partners of each other. And you could not have expected this between the US and the Soviet Union back in the Cold War times. If you look at the level of industrial intermediation and technological intertwining that the US and China have had until Trump came and torpedoed some of these things, it was of a kind you could never have imagined between the Soviet Union and the US. So we have to keep this at the back of our mind before we try and chart out a new world order, or we try and understand what are the main underpinnings of this world order. We also see very clearly, because of this complex interdependence, the idea of decoupling either from China or from the United States is a misnomer. It's not going to work. And you're seeing that at various levels, that countries are trying to rely on the US for military and security needs, but increasingly are casting their lot with China when it comes to issues of commerce, investment, and trade. And this seems to be something that has been going on even in the 4 years of Trump, and I probably envisage this continuing for the foreseeable future, which is very evident in the fact that in the last few years, and particularly the last few months, in the waning days of the Trump presidency, we see that there is intensive courtship going on between Beijing and Washington, trying to win over smaller countries in the Indo Pacific. I mean, for many of you who might be following global geopolitics very closely, there has been increasing coordination between India and US in the Indian Ocean in particular over the last few months of the Trump presidency. And we saw how India and US have been making joint efforts to win over Bangladesh, to win over Sri Lanka, to win over Maldives, to win over Myanmar, and to ensure that these countries are not fully in the lot of China. And subsequently, the Chinese visits also to many of the ASEAN countries, many of the Indian Ocean countries, has also intensified because China recognizes that there is definitely a pushback against its own desire for centrality in world affairs. Having said this, we also have to keep in mind that there are some very, very contradictory, patterns that are confluencing today. In the last 4 years, there's no doubt to what Dr. Shetty said in terms of Trump being able to plot and plug in on the right questions. But where I would disagree very, very humbly with you is in terms of the instrumentalities and the approach that he took. It's very fine to ask the right questions and to basically kind of rough up the entire foreign policy establishment, but the approach needed to be coordinated, curated, and tailor made if China really had to be checked. In fact, I would go so far as to say that in the last 4 years, leave out what Trump has done over the last 8 9 months of his presidency, Trump's disjointed approach to global affairs, the fact that he actually frayed his own alliance partners, he sent his relationship with Europe into disrepair. He began to seem to punish Japan, South Korea, even Australia, which are your cornerstone allies in East Asia and the Asia Pacific. His messaging to India was often basically more normative than really in terms of practicality. All of this led to the acceleration of China's rise. In fact, the abdication of the United States from world affairs, the retreat that the United States practiced in world affairs over the last 4 years, and more so, the fact that America was seen as whining and carping, whereas China was seen as a country looking to offer solutions. This actually, in my own hypothesis, accelerated China's strategic ascent over the last 4 years. So much so that today we have to ask the question, what kind of an approach is Biden going to have? Because this is the fundamental dilemma that Biden is facing. He is not facing even a China of 2016. He is now facing a China of 2020, and he may be steeped in the approach of Obama. So, this is where he's going to have a fundamental dilemma, that his impulses are those that go back to the Obama period, which facilitated China's rise as a kind of a G2. But he is dealing now at the back end of a Trump presidency, where China's capacities to deliver to countries in the neighborhood and beyond, China's power projection capabilities have suddenly expanded. And we have seen that since the pandemic, that China has seemed to be a country, whether we like it or not, it seemed like a country which is more in control of itself, making a quick economic rebound, while the United States has been grappling not only with the worst economic crisis, but also with the worst public emergency and health crisis. So we have to keep this in mind. Thirdly, the strategic world order is also going to be further challenged by the nature of China's rise. And what do I mean by it? If you look at the USSR when it rose, it was largely an ideologically driven communist party, an artificially brought together country, which was effectively looking for a sphere of influence, but the number of verticals in which it had a pioneering presence was very, very limited. I mean, no one ever talked about the Soviet economy in the way in which we talk about the stranglehold that the Chinese economy has on the global economy. Even today, we hear that by 2028, 29, China is going to eclipse the US as the largest economy in the world. And by 2050, when its fertility rates would have dropped, it still would be accounting for 40 to 45% of global GDP. This was never an issue with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was always seen through the prism and lens of its runaway military power. But in the case of China, why it becomes a more challenging and a more predatory threat is because its strategic ascent has elements of predatory rise and elements of pioneering rise. There are elements, for example, technology. You could never have imagined talking about China in terms of technological superiority, let's say 10 or 15 years ago, when we still basically rubbish Chinese technology. But today, even the United States is having to acknowledge that China has arrived on the technological scene. And that is why, when we look at a world order where China today is seen as the predator and seen as basically challenging the basic tenets of the world order, it is trying to come to terms with the predatory aspects of China, but also the technologically pioneering aspects of China, which is going to be a big dilemma not only for the United States but also for a number of countries. I believe that there are four C's, which I think are going to be arch pillars of the world order going forward. The first C is commerce. And why do I say commerce? Because we all understand, as we are coming out of this global, public health crisis, which is also an attendant economic crisis, that the only way to propel economies out of their current situation, which is a huge deep hole, is to be able to enhance and expand trade. So trade and investment relationships are going to be very, very critical. And this is where I want to point out that Trump turned his back on the TPP, when actually he should have been taking up the TPP and ensuring that at least the United States is the leader in the Asia Pacific, if not the Indo Pacific, with its cornerstone economic allies, driving a trade regional pact, unlike what the Chinese are doing now. Today, unfortunately, the RCEP, which is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and this is very interesting. Despite the fact that countries have deep concerns in the region about China, they saw to it, including Vietnam, which of course is a feisty neighbor of China, they saw to it that RCEP does not get delayed, but actually RCEP is kept on schedule. I think this, unfortunately, was a big thumbs up to China in the light of America abdicating the TPP and walking away from TPP. So there is a huge now, kind of speculation happening whether Biden's going to waste any more time or he's going to rush back and try to formalize a TPP, because in the absence of a trans-Pacific partnership, regional trading bloc, the Chinese-led bloc, which will involve the ASEAN countries and your East Asian neighbors, including Australia, New Zealand, and the South Pacific, will become the dominant regional trade theme in this region, which we will have to contend with. The second is connectivity. And here it's very clear that what we are seeing now are two competitive visions of connectivity. The Chinese vision of connectivity is project based capitalism, as I call it. It's basically capitalism. They are basically stepping into countries' sovereign territories, they're building infrastructure, and then basically on the strength of the debt that is created in those countries, they are able to essentially trade these territories for equity. But what is the option? And I've always been saying this: if you want to push back against China, it has to be through tangible initiatives. The Asia Africa Growth Corridor, which was promoted by Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Abe, was an excellent initiative. And it was an initiative that was based on very sound principles, which are the underpinnings of a democratic, civilized world order. But we also have to acknowledge that because of troubles in respective countries, and we are democracy, so there are many challenges that come up to policy making. The AAGC has not moved at the kind of speed it should have moved, as a result of which, what is the dominant narrative today? Will the BRI collapse? I would say, ask the question, regardless of whether the BRI collapses, do we have a tenable alternative to the BRI? Yes, credit to Trump. Last February, when he came here and met with Prime Minister Modi, he proposed the Blue Dot Network to New Delhi. We were cautious to begin with. What one understands is we are quite supportive of the Blue Dot Network right now, and it is widely believed that there will be pressure on the Biden administration not to dump BDN just because it was a Trump initiative, but actually take it up because the Blue Dot Network initiative that the Americans are propounding with Indo-Pacific partners, with India being very critical in that, I think if that can be taken to its logical conclusion over the next decade or so, can be a viable challenger to China's Belt and Road Initiative. I think that's very important. The third is compact, and this is very important. The American vision of a world order has largely been an alliance driven world order. But today, countries are not interested in alliances which bind them down into any one set of rules or institutions. They would like to rather explore strategic partnerships which have mutually beneficial outcomes. At the same time, they give them strategic maneuverability in foreign policy. And that's why the world order now is going to be driven less by cornerstone alliances of the kind that the US did with Japan, with South Korea, with Australia during the Cold War period, or for that matter, even with Philippines, and more with the kind of strategic partnership, for example, that they're building with India, and the kind of partnerships which can be taken forward with many other countries. For example, through, for example, the Quad. The Quad is a good example of a partnership between four democracies. It's not an alliance. It's a partnership where they're coming together to be able to subserve certain strategic goals. So it is the partnership over alliances which is going to be very important. And the last one in this arch pillar is global commons. Because at the end of the day, what is China trying to do? Through China's domination and power projection, they are trying to convert their centrality in today's global geopolitics into Chinese centricity. Now, that is not assured, it's highly unlikely that it will happen because with China, the relationship that China has with most of its peers is what I call transactionalism without trust. There is no level of trust with China, but there is a high degree of transactionalism that even China's feisty neighbors have with it. Best example, Japan and Vietnam. They don't have trust in China, but China remains their biggest trading partners. And that's how you look at transactionalism without trust. So the global commons is where governance architecture is going to be critical. And that is where India, the United States, Japan, Australia, Vietnam, let's say Singapore, and other countries who really want, even for that matter, European countries now, who have shaped up their own Indo-Pacific policy, they will be critical in preserving the global commons. And it is the preservation of the global commons away from the predatory control of China, which is going to be important. So in this context, where is President Biden and what do we expect? Let me talk a little bit about a minute or so on the Indo-US relationship. There is no doubt that the Indo-US relationship has grown on the dial for the last 20 plus years, ever since the historic visit of President Clinton to India, and when the natural alliance or the natural partners phrase was used for the first time. Across administrations on both ends of the spectrum, we have seen a bipartisan consensus emerge about the strength of India US relations. And India US relations have witnessed an upswing. However, we must also be realistic to admit that despite the foundational pacts which we have signed since Trump came to office, Starts, of course, with Lemoa, moves on to Comcasa. We've also signed the Strategic Trade Authorization, Tier 1. We have BECA. We now have the International Security Annex. Despite of all these foundational pacts, the fact remains there are critical irritants in the India-US relationship that keep our relationship from elevating to that unique strategic level, which can be much beyond a strategic partnership, but is not necessarily a fundamental security alliance. I think that challenge is going to be very big. I say this because we've seen the recent document that's been declassified, which of course was the Trump administration's institutional approach of accelerating India's rise. So far, what we have heard from the Biden administration is they would like to continue with that policy of accelerating India's rise. But the terms on which that accelerated rise will happen will also be very critical because let's not forget, we are yet far away from being able to work out a free trade deal, or for that matter, even a comprehensive trade and investment pact with the United States. Even on in terms of defense equipment, right now what we are seeing largely is basically armament procurement by India. We have not been able to take the defense trade and technology initiative to that level where the seamless intermediation between our different institutions happen. So that level of confidence has still not been reached, but hopefully the rise of China and the consequences of that rise will push the Biden administration to move away from the view that the progressives have in the Democratic Party, which is to basically find a modus vivendi with China, not to push too far on China, and to be able to actually take on China. The next point will be in terms of what does Biden do in terms of looking at our relationship with Russia, because Dr. Shetty mentioned Russia, and this is where we are going to have this fundamental problem in the world order, because on the one hand, the Americans today seem to be more transfixed on facing the Russian challenge than addressing the Chinese challenge. For us, it remains the Chinese challenge as opposed to the Russian challenge. But at a systemic level, let's not forget that the Russians and the Chinese, regardless of certain issues they may have between themselves, they are increasingly working in tandem. Because President Putin has realized that if he has to remain the strategic disruptor that he is, if he wants to maintain his global standing as a global power, he needs the support of China. If there is no China along with him, Russia gets badly isolated, as you saw with the annexation of Crimea and the subsequent sanctions that came on Russia, the way in which Russia was thrown out of the G8, and the way in which they were insulted at the Brisbane G20 in 2014. So Putin has seen this, and Putin wants to work closely with China. So the problem is going to be the Americans are transfixed with Russia. India recognizes that China is the bigger challenge, but within the larger Indo-Pacific, I think it is a Russia-China alliance or a Russia-China compact that is going to be very critical as a challenge for us to see. Lastly, I will leave you with one point, which is there are critical issues on which India and the US are going to have to find some degree of synergy. And I think that still hasn't happened. Even though both sides have agreed on an Indo Pacific formulation, you have the Indo Pacific Command, you have the Americans playing a greater role in the Indian Ocean. But given that President Biden is going to be focused on the pandemic and on the economic issues, not just for this year, but I guess maybe even deep into 2022, the ability of India to be able to synergize its priorities with America is going to be a big challenge. And this is where Indian diplomats will have to engage very strongly, not just with counterparts in the Biden administration, but to call upon certain individuals within the US government over the years who have really played a great role in strengthening the Indo-US compact, because it's only the Indo-US compact which can become the linchpin to a larger pushback against China across the Indo-Pacific. You can't expect that with a US Australia or a US Japan or a US South Korea, or for that matter, even a US ASEAN relationship. So with these words, I'll stop and I'll be happy to take any questions later. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you, Dr. Dattesh. We'll be taking we'll having the question answer session at the end of the after the discussion with Dr. Kishore. Now, may I introduce our second speaker, Dr. Nanda Kishore. Dr. Nanda Kishore is an associate professor in the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Manipal. He holds an MPhil and PhD in political science from Hyderabad Central University. India. He completed his postdoc at University of Leiden, Netherlands, with Erasmus Mundus Fellowship from European Union. Dr. Kishore has been working on conflict resolution, West Asia refugees, and international law, and internally displaced persons and governance. He was a recipient of short-term junior research fellowship by UNHCR, Brookings, USA, Government of Finland, and MRG Kolkata. Dr. Kishore was also conferred the prestigious International Visitor Leadership Program IVLP by United States State Department of Government of United States of America during June-July 2013. He is an analyst at Islamic Theology of Counterterrorism, London. With this brief introduction, now I hand over the session to Nanda Kishore. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dasharath. I hope I'm audible, and it's a pleasure to be part of the IBAT, the ongoing debates and sessions that IBAT conducts. So thanks to you at the very outset for having invited me and my good friend, Dr. Dattesh Parulekar. In fact, we've been friends for quite a long time. We share similar thoughts, ideology, a lot of other things. It's always a pleasure to be debating with him and debating on a pertinent issue that certainly concerns the world, and also which is going to be a defining factor in the days to come. Now, as Dr. Parulekar also spoke about, just few other things that I would want to bring back a bit of back and forth is essentially looking at what was the difference in the Trump administration, because only when we look at that one, then I can or we can talk about what will Biden be planning to do, in the sense, will there be anything new, or he'll be just dishing out whatever that he had done during his vice presidency along with Mr. Obama, where perhaps it was the lowest in the recent history with regard to the United States itself. Other than great speeches and other things, nothing else had happened. In fact, United States had gone down drastically with regard to whatever we call, from the realist perspective, the power projection, in the sense when states are assessed through their economic might as well as the military might. In fact, it started going down, and people started invariably ridiculing United States. In fact, the president of the Philippines used a cuss word against the president of the United States. So that is the state of affairs that United States has gone down to. What did Trump administration do? What is that disruptive component that came in? First and foremost, being a businessman, for him, he thought, I think the United States was spending too much. United States was shouldering too many responsibilities, where it would be the world's bad boy, but it would take up all sorts of burdens. It would spend, where the others, whenever there is something good, they would join, and whenever they have to spend, and whenever they have to take some amount of brunt out of it, they would wither away. This is how it was running the show. So what he did was, he brought back that primacy of the United States, saying that wherever I am there, there's going to be America first. There's going to be my national interest that will come first, and then rest other things. This is the first thing that he brought, which is also famously called as the America First. Second, what he also ended up doing was, he ripped some of the bad deals. Where, as I told you, he thought there was no uniformity. There was also no accountability with regard to some of those partners, including that of the NATO, in which he was involved, and he threatened to pull off the way he did the TPP and many other things. Then the same NATO partners who said they would not be caring about it, or they would speak back and everything. There were a lot of expectations on Angela Merkel, Macron, to several others, but none of them could stand against him, and all of them fell in line, and then finally ended up making greater contributions. This is something that he did. So he ripped the bad deals. Third, he made the allies to pay. As I told you, that wherever he felt that he had to stand for, he stood for. Something like Israel. When Israel always expected a great friend in the United States, though every president, this I have said time and again, every president since Clinton used Israel as part of their, or moving the embassy to Jerusalem as part of their propaganda, as part of their election manifesto. Nobody ever dared delivering. This man delivered, and he delivered something that he promised. That is very, very important one. So he stood by Israel whenever there was an issue. That means when he felt there were certain institutions at the UN or anywhere else, they were discriminatory to Israel, he stood by them. And whether by hook or crook, he made sure that he would also move out of some of those institutions, which we have seen in the recent times or till his administration got over. Fourth one is perhaps people had felt that China is sort of a necessary evil. That means you just cannot get away with. You have to survive with that one, and it's going to be harsh, but there is no option. More so with regard to the European countries, if you precisely look in the type of economic might that probably that they should be able to throw much more light on than on that one than me. The economic might that China had spread, or the way it has spread its tentacles across the spectrum, people felt that it was inevitable and there is no possibility of stopping China at all. Now he found an opportunity to punish, and he also felt that there was a possibility, or one can use the American might to stop it, and he tried doing that one, which the Chinese are aware of, and the Chinese have been were probably praying to get rid of this guy in whatever the way that was possible, because he went soft on Russia, but he went very, very hard on China, and China was facing a terrible problem with this man, because he would behave like a businessman. Second, he would also not fear threatening them in whatever the possible way. He tried influencing Canada, he tried influencing every other institution that was possible. So here where he felt probably, or a lot of people across the world felt that he was someone who should have got another term to show what he was capable of, or what the Chinese are capable of. In the sense, either of the things would have come up. Neither we are passionate about China, nor we are passionate about United States. We take a neutral stand here, where either it would have proved that the Chinese are much more stronger internally, or it would have proved that Trump was much more capable and than what people wrote off. So both of things could have happened, but many of the international relations scholars feel that however decisive, however disruptive was Donald Trump, but he was somebody who was extremely capable and who could pull off a lot of things. Fourth, he did not start any wars. That's the most interesting factor. In fact, he cut down on it so much, it should have actually paid him. Unfortunately, I think the pandemic played a different type of ball game, which Trump himself did not imagine, which he handled very badly, no doubt about it. But other than that one, there was no possibility to write off Trump with regard to this particular election. He would have had a cakewalk if had there been no pandemic, actually, because he was doing so well. Second, the domestic audience were happy with regard to the soldiers coming back, no new war starting, and then the amount of money they were spending. Something like a simple statistics can be of Afghanistan. George Bush Jr. and then Obama together. If you look in the money that was spent in Afghanistan was $8 trillion. Now, $8 trillion could have probably run few countries, and their economies are not of that size. So that would have been the biggest advantage that Trump would have had with regard to, had he been able to manage the coronavirus or the pandemic in a much better way, rather than going a little bullish on that one. The fifth factor is that he somehow did not get bogged down, or he did not get struck with the bureaucracy. This is something that he did out of box, where in every other part of the world, we have seen how bureaucracy controls politics and how bureaucracy controls politicians, including that of ours, where there are so many difficulties because you have divided loyalties. If somebody was promoted in the previous regime, and that person would end up showing all his resentment, or he would try working against the present regime, those type of things are a very, very normal problem. And they try also controlling, because not all the politicians are well versed in certain subjects of the state, so in which you have to invariably depend on the bureaucracy. Here it was a classic case where he did not get succumbed to the pressure of the bureaucracy. Rather, he showed the place to the bureaucracy, saying that what he is capable and where he can put people. That's why it was more of a business model, hire or fire, no warning, next morning sort of a behavior, which almost destroyed the bureaucracy, or it threatened them, that by hook or crook they wanted to get rid of. That's why some people in different parts of the world felt probably there was some amount of truth when they said there were some issues with regard to the election outcomes. because bureaucracy is capable of doing a lot of things in any part of the world for that matter. So now these are very strong points that he had. And then look at the amount of success. Every US president, post 1970s or post 1980, tried to talk to the North Korean leadership. Nobody succeeded ever. But this individual was able to meet the leadership of North Korea twice. And then look at Israel and the Abraham Accord. He was able to pull off something that others did not even imagine about. Look at the way number of countries are just joining like that. There was one in 79. There was other one in 1994. 79 was Egypt. 1994 was Jordan. But apart from that one, nobody ever succeeded. The most liberal president, according to most of the liberal scholars, was Mr. Obama. Even Obama could not pull it off. There were limitations to. But how did he bring these deals? How he succeeded in making some of those people to believe, including that of Saudi Arabia, UAE, and all that. Though Saudi Arabia is yet to join, but at least some of those very, very strong allies to join the Abraham Accord, and how it's actually having a spillover effect. These are certain components of it. Now, looking at what Biden is capable of, what is expected, or the post-Trump world order that we are talking about, essentially, the American leadership is the most crucial one. In this scenario, first and foremost for me, I'm skeptical about is what will he really bring back? If you have to say, will he take us back to the Obama administration, or will he really come up with something that is new? Now, if he's going to set it back to what Obama had done or what had happened during the Obama era, I don't see anything change. There is no great change about it. It's just about your politics. You have spoken something in your election manifesto. You're just going to reset. Then what is the real contribution is going to be very, very interesting for me, because already they have started one after the other. They have started and they entered already to the Paris Accord. With regard to climate change, they're going to start off with many other things, as Dr. Parulekar was also talking about. There are expectations on the TPP. There are many other expectations on the economic front. What exactly is going to do is very interesting, apart from, let's say, the citizenship and many other things that they are talking about. There were also strains with regard to multilateralism of the United States itself. Will the United States take that extra step to reset the multilateral forums, or it's going to bring back all those leaders some amount of confidence, because Trump had rattled many of them? Will that going to be helpful? And that's going to be the world order that we're looking at. What is the real contribution? What is the original contribution, if you ask me? Which is going to be helpful to the world order? I certainly don't have an answer. But will there be a resurrection of the United States? Even that I'm not very, very sure. It might simply help out the Chinese much more. In fact, they were looking for leadership like this, who would be much more worried about the affirmative actions to bring how many blacks would be there, how many Indian origin people will be there in the cabinet and other things, rather than looking at what is going to be the outcome of his administration. If that's the way they're going to be a social justice governance system, then we need not expect anything from them. I'm actually biting the bullet. I'm trying to be very, very open with regard to what we are talking about. Or it's going to be the same age-old style of, again, trying to target Russians. Nothing is going to happen. Nothing is going to happen with regard to Mr. Putin. Putin is, in fact, he is the one who's raising the toast and he's having fun. This is what he was expecting. He was expecting people who are weaker. He was expecting those people who just cannot make decisions to come in there, so that he can continue to be, he can continue to have his own laugh. So that's going to be very interesting, because Biden seems to be very soft on China. He's going to be, in fact, going to have much more cordial relations, and there's going to be a reworking of lot of relationships. That's why the moment Trump's era got over, the Chinese started putting sanctions on a lot of individuals from the United States. Now, if he's going to target Russia, then let's be assured that Putin is going to meddle with a lot of things. In fact, he continues to support Snowden there, and we can expect many more new things that are going to happen from the cyber front. Nevertheless, it's not that the Chinese are going to keep quiet, nor the United States is going to keep quiet. But this is going to be very, very interesting angle, because of the triangular component of Russia, China, and the United States. That's something that we're going to watch out, because the relationship between this triangle is going to define what's going to be the rest of the things. And then do we say these this administration is going to be backing the liberal world order, I don't know, because the very idea of the liberal world order itself is confusing, because we don't know whether they're talking about the neoliberal component, are they talking about the trade not being isolationist, not being conservative is liberal world order, or again they're going to start their original project, the United States original project of transporting democracies to different parts of the world. Is that the what is the liberal world order that we are talking about? We need to wait and watch whether there are going to be new initiatives on the war side. What is the type of thing? I'm again confused on those components, because if that is going to be the case, again it's going to cost a lot of money, and then this jingoism or symbolism of saying that we'll all do together, we will have an inclusive United States, we are all one, and then try putting up saying that we have a what is a one front, one face, we are all going to work for the United States, but nevertheless again trying to do the same thing of America first. How it's going to work out is very, very interesting. Now, from India's perspective, India knows its trump card, in the sense India knows how to keep the United States in the lobby, in the sense, or how to keep itself very close to, because it continues to believe in the idea of buying arms, and it continues to believe that there here that you need to do certain things that's going to be taken care of. Apart from that one, it still hasn't, though we say the relationships have matured, but it still hasn't gone beyond a particular level. If India is going to continue to say that we are going to go ahead with the S-400 from the Russians, how is the Biden administration going to look at it? Whether it's going to disrupt already set friends with regard to the idea of democracy, or are they going to target every other one who's going to buy weapons from the Russians and then put them on sanctions? How it's going to be? With regard to West Asia, again, you have Turkey, which is trying to be extremely assertive. You have a good friend in Mohammed bin Salman, but his doings and his behavior might not go well with you, but he continues to have very strong hold. In fact, recent rapprochement, or for that matter, recent readjustment of relations with Qatar is also bringing back some amount of importance again to Saudi Arabia, where MBS is trying to lead from the front. So how is going to define again what are the priorities? They haven't spelled out yet, so we have to look at again other priorities of the world order. If we look in whether it's going to be same NATO, again trying to interfere in Iraq, again trying to interfere in Afghanistan. He's telling that we will relook at the deal and other things. How are they going to relook at the deal? If the deal is something that's been mooted by the Russians, and it was held at in one of the places in Russia, how are they going to relook at it? Are they going to completely avoid the Russians and then trying to do? I don't think it's going to work. So there are many more complications. That's why for me, it's comparatively pessimistic in terms of what is going to be the order that we are looking at, or the new world order under Biden. I believe to a large extent, or 90% of it's going to be just bring back what was there during the Obama administration, and there is nothing that's going to be redefined or something that's out of the box idea that the United States is going to offer at this juncture. That's my humble submission. Probably I'll stop it here, and if there are questions, we can take from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kishore. My first question would be to Dr. Parulekar. Sir, what will be the role of Russia in the post-Trump era? We see that Americans are more obsessed with Russia, and they want America to take hard on with Russia rather than with taking on the Chinese administration. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, so just to follow up on what I was saying, of course, this whole issue with Putin goes back a long time, because, the Putin rivalry, in a sense, with the liberal the presidential order in America goes back a long time. It goes back to the time when he came into office, his run-ins with Hillary Clinton, subsequently as Secretary of State, etc., etc. But as Dr. Nanda Kishore rightly said, if this becomes a US versus Russia face-off, then obviously while America feels more confident that it can push Putin into a corner, because in its own strategic understanding, it feels that while Russia is a strategic disruptor, Russia also is a kind of a bear who can be put into a certain box, unlike China, where the strategic appraisal is it's already a great power, it's already arrived, and it's someone with whom there has to be a grand bargain. So I see that the Biden administration will push hard on some of these investigations on Putin and Russia. They will also try and use Russia for domestic purposes to try and discredit Trump, to try and show how much Trump was endangering American national security by being a hawk with Russia. But the larger issue of whether or not they will take on Russia per se, or as Dr. Nanda Kishore said, they will go back into the bureaucratic way of punishing countries who basically engage with Russia. And this is where there is going to be the big question mark, whether on Russia per se, but on third countries who seek to engage with Russia. For example, he talked about China 400. That is absolutely right. But even on other issues, for example, the Chennai Vladivostok economic corridor, which India is trying to push deeply with Russia. India is also looking for a trilateral between Japan, Russia, and India to be able to push for greater stakes in the Sakhalin Islands. The Americans may actually make that a condition on India, that you have to go slow on this if you really want to be able to be part of the American Indo-Pacific framework. There is also a belief that Biden may push back against India's description of the free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific. The word inclusive used by Prime Minister Modi to as more like a kind of a sense of confidence to President Putin. So Biden may ask for certain conditions from India in terms of reworking India's own conceptualization of the free and open Indo-Pacific. But the bigger concern I have is whether he will cede ground to both Russia and China in critical stakes such as Afghanistan. And that's my bigger concern, because obviously it's clear now that this whole idea of bringing Taliban into peace negotiations has not really delivered. If anything, the violence has gone up. If anything, Taliban has got legitimized. And if anything, now they look the stronger side because they basically got a lot of their people freed without necessarily having to make any tangible commitments to a peaceful and democratic Afghanistan. So my concern is that the Russian, Chinese, Pakistani involvement in Afghanistan may tacitly get the support of Biden, because Biden would like to see that the troops come back home. So he wants some way to see that the troops can come back home without Afghanistan actually blowing itself up. He knows that making any commitments to India or trying to get India to make commitments to Afghanistan is not going to work, because India has a very clear red line, which is that it's not going to basically send troops into Afghanistan, nor is it going to have any kind of an occupational presence. So the bigger concern is going to be him not taking direct actions on Russia, looking to punish third countries, and also getting into some kind of a tacit understanding with Russia on critical theaters such as Afghanistan, which has a bearing on our national security.
My next question would be to Dr. Nanda Kishore. So, what would be the role of America in the South China Sea? In the sense, we also are very much keenly observing. We as India, we are keenly observing the activities in the South China Sea, and we have some partners there. So, what will be the American role in the South China Sea now? What do you expect?
Oh, again, this comes back to the question of the Indo-Pacific again, as Dr. Parulekar was talking about. Now it depends on how United States is going to behave with regard to the idea of the Indo-Pacific. Because if they're going to say that we are not anymore an Indo-Pacific nation, or if they withdraw from there, from whatever that has been done by Trump, that's directly going to have a say with regard to the South China Sea. Again, there is going to be some amount of pressure by the ASEAN countries. The ASEAN countries also have an expectation.
We have been, with some military partnership with some of the countries there, selling our armaments there. So will it get affected, or how will it affect?
Nothing. None of those things are going to matter here, in the sense already China has this particular issue which where it thinks that India is renewing its relationship with regard to the neighborhood, in the sense whether it's Maldives, whether it is Sri Lanka, because Sri Lanka recently made the statement where Jayanta Colombage, the foreign secretary, made a statement, India first. This is something for the first time happening in the recent past, in the sense, at least since the independent India, that we see, we have not seen a neighbor saying that India first. So at least they have made a pronouncement here. So the Chinese are aware of their limitations also, which they're working on. So they're going to raise the bar in the neighborhood of India. If we are going to get engaged in the South China Sea, we are going to be more active with regard to the ASEAN states. It's going to be simply trying to use that balance of power concept in the in India's neighborhood, where it's going to try and become more and more active, trying to help out some of these states. That's how it's going to do. And if we don't budge to that also, then it has the other option of always using the Pakistanis, always trying to help them out in terms of troubling India. So those are going to be the way. But apart from that one, it entirely depends on how United States is going to behave in the Indo-Pacific. That is going to be directly reflecting on the South China Sea. So if they back off from the idea of Indo-Pacific to appease the Chinese, or say just because Trump was antagonistic to the Chinese, that they want to reverse everything that they have done during the Trump administration, then it's going to directly affect on that one. But nevertheless, India has been very, very clear. India has said open and inclusive Indo-Pacific, which includes all these regions. So India is going to continue to engage. India, irrespective of whether the United States is going to engage or not, India is going to continue to engage with Japan. India is going to continue to engage with South Korea. India is going to continue to engage with every other power that's ready to cooperate with India. And it also is aware of the might of China. It's not that India is not aware of. India knows it's what it is capable of, but it greatly knows what it is not capable of. So that makes things much more clearer, where our expectations with regard to South China Sea is not going to be phenomenally changing, but it's going to just continue the way it is. And slowly and steadily, probably India will try building bilateral relations with some of these countries, where we may sell weapons to them, we may sell different other things that India is opening up now. It's not anymore taking that moral pedestal that it was trying to cover itself for a very, very long time. So realistically speaking, or from the realist perspective, that's going to be very interesting with regard to India's behavior in the South China Sea. You need to unmute yourself.
During your Dr. Parulekar, during your talk, you spoke of accelerated India rise. The US brought in to counter China actually. Now, looking at the composition of President Biden's cabinet, will this get affected? Because will they bring in the concept of the trouble of Kashmir in between our relationships? Because his cabinet is more diverse, and his advisors are from different countries with whom we may not have that great relationship. What's your take on that?
Look, I mean, when you have bilateral, discussions, some irritants are always there on the table. And I think this is something that in a mature relationship, we have come to expect from the United States. I mean, let's not forget that even when Imran Khan met with Trump, there was some suggestion from Trump, because he spoke impromptu, which kind of gave India the feeling that Trump wanted to get involved in Kashmir. And immediately the Indian Foreign Office hit back. And then, of course, Trump flipped and said, no, that was never an idea. In the case of the so-called liberals or the Democrats in America, we have come to expect there will be some degree of chatter on human rights, on Kashmir. They will try to lecture us. But I don't think it will be the same as it used to be with Robin Raphael and the Clinton administration, because times have changed a lot. I think America's own strategic appraisal of India has come a long way, obviously, because India is a much different India today in 2021 than India was, let's say, in 1998 or 1999. So in that sense, we are used to this. We are not going to get too hung up on this. I don't see Kashmir or human rights becoming such an issue that the very relationship is on stake. That's not going to happen. But we have to deal with situations like Obama. When Obama came to India, he lectured us on his last speech before going back to America. And we took it in our stride. We gave it back in the way in which we should, saying there are red lines, and we move on. I think the bigger issue that I feel, and I'm a little less skeptical than my dear friend, Dr. Nanda Kishor, because I think even though Biden is a president who will try to be politically correct, and he's steeped in the Obama approach, I think the existentiality of the threat from China to America is increasingly dawning on the establishment in America. I think Americans are now recognizing that in the face of China, they are not just facing any other challenger, they are facing an existential threat to American dominance. And to that extent, if they continue to be only politically correct, then probably by 2030, as the Americans themselves say, not only will China have eclipsed them economically, but they themselves acknowledge that China will be very close to matching them technologically. And this is where I believe that I would hope, and I am quite confident that if you listen to what Blinken said, Blinken actually tried to turn back the clock by saying, we agree with Trump's approach on China, but we will have different instrumentalities. I think there is an appreciation that they should not throw out everything that Trump has done only because Trump was Trump. There are certain good policies that Trump brought in, like the Clean Technology Initiative. I think the Clean Technology Initiative is something that the Biden administration is expected to take up, and possibly with Boris Johnson's help and many other countries going forward, we might be able to see something like a D10 or a kind of a Clean Technologies 10 shaping up as a kind of a pushback against China. So I would not be very much worried with the off comments here or there, like Kamala Harris's views, for example, on Kashmir or on human rights. I think what is more important is America's strategic establishment is convinced that India's acceleration as a Asian power, not only a regional power, but a continental power, is in the long-term interest of the United States and in the long-term interest of peace, security, and stability across the Asian continent.
I will take a last question now. It will be for Dr. Nanda Kishor. Sir, we saw Trump all the way going to Singapore and establishing a communication channel with President Kim. Now, what next? What do you feel? How will the relationship go ahead, or how will it be taken ahead by America now?
Oh, I think that's I would rather say probably I don't want to do that predictive function because it's very early to write them off. One, second, there seems to be some sort of a different approach that's coming from Kim with regard to his own country. He is not as brutal as he used to be. He's been of late apologizing or saying certain things that I should have done better than this one for you people, but I'll work hard and all sorts of things. So we really don't know what is he up to. So who knows, he may actually see the leadership being comparatively weak, and so he may go a little more cozy to Biden administration. But everything depends on, I think the Biden administration would want to keep quiet until, again, North Korea is going to threaten the United States with one or the other thing, in the sense saying that when it will do that, it will do this, until and unless it brings any topic of that sort, or somebody else pushes, let's say South Korea being a very close ally to the United States, pushes saying that when do something, United States is not going to talk, because it will open a Pandora box, because then there will be an immediate comparison by the conservatives who will say, look at your president and look at our president, what he was capable of, what you're capable of. So the administration would be very, very careful with regard to the issue of North Korea itself. But as I told you, I don't want to do this predictive function. How was Kim going to behave? Though that's the basic work of foreign policy, because I don't work on North Korea's foreign policy. I would want to probably stop at that juncture and not try predicting the behavior of Kim. I think if we were able or capable of doing that one, I don't think this issue of the North Korea being that sort of a state would have even arrived or would have been an issue at all. So I don't think I'm capable of answering what it's going to be. But from the Biden administration, yes, there is going to be it's going to be tough because even they being liberal and they're trying to negotiate or trying to talk to everyone, but having witnessed what happened to Obama and how Kim kept rejecting any offer or every offer that came from the United States, I'm not very sure how he's going to behave. But if at all he sees this as an opportunity, if there is a change of mind, the way he's behaving in last few months, probably there are possibilities, is my humble submission.
We have to go. Now, may I request Dr. Dattesh for the summary of his talk in the 1 minute or so.
Yeah, so thank you very much. Yeah, so basically what it boils down to, I think the thrust of what we really talked about today is that this new world order is still in the process of formalizing itself. We are seeing power shift and power transition happening in ways and means which sometimes make sense, but sometimes are quite contradictory. For example, a point that needed to also come up was we are seeing two contradictory trends playing themselves out under America First of Trump or Prime Minister Modi's Atmanirbharta and many others, we are seeing a strong sense of national self-reliance being brought back into the discourse by strong conservative leaders in countries. At the same time, there is equally a push for regionalism and for regional trade and trying to be able to build the building blocks for transnational economic relations. So, this is a classic example of the kind of world order in which we are in now, where you are seeing both kinds of trends playing themselves out, and we don't quite know where exactly we're leading to. But as we boil down, we can say this much that the United States and China are locked into a new kind of a complexly interdependent competition, very different to what the Americans had with the USSR. It is a different relationship, it's a much more complex relationship. And America also has to win back credibility in many parts of the world, which has got eroded over the years. First, of course, with the Obama administration with politically correctness, and then, if I may say, with the Trump administration, which had the right intentions. Maybe not always the best instrumentalities or the best approach, but had the right intentions. But those intentions need to be taken forward to its logical conclusion, because the openings that Trump has made are the definitive openings by which the United States actually can regain some of its dominance and can also be the leader of the democratic world, which can ensure, as I once again say, that Chinese centrality does not become Chinese centricity.
Thank you, Dr. Parulekar. Dr. Nanda Kishor.
Yeah, for me, it is going to be a clash because now Biden administration is thinking to come back to the multilateral forums that the Trump administration had given up. So they have to be balancing what we call as the idea of multilateralism and multipolarity, like our Minister for External Affairs has said, where he believes greater value in multipolarity than that of multilateralism, though we continue to be part of a lot of multilateral institutions. Now, how is United States going to balance that? Because on the one hand, there is always this fear of Chinese taking over the United States or Chinese being threatening to the United States. On the other hand, the inevitability, as Dr. Dattesh mentioned, the complex interdependence, nature of complex interdependence, that's going to be very, very interesting to see how they're going to manage. Second, the primacy of the United States, or bringing back that glory to the United States that these people are talking about, how ethical that is going to be. Is it going to be in the domestic front, and then they're going to tell that Trump had been bad for the United States? Or are they going to talk about many others? Because many others leaders did not actually have an issue with Israel, did not have an issue with Trump. Saudi Arabia did not have an issue with Trump. India did not have issue with Trump. There are many other states, in fact, did not have issue at all, including that of Sri Lanka. I can tell you, Sri Lanka always had an issue with the United States, because in the UNHCR, UNHRC, at the Human Rights Council, every time they would bring up a resolution against Sri Lanka, but Trump did not do that. So they did not have a problem with Mr. Donald Trump. So like that, there are many countries who really did not see a problem at all. In fact, they had more fun during his administration and his tenure. Now they're going to see again if the United States is going to go back to the rhetorics. It's going to going back to that primacy where it says that it wants to transport democracy elsewhere. It wants to start new wars. What is going to be? How are they going to balance this one? On the one hand, they want to balance and reset their relation with China. On the other hand, how you are going to be in the top of the world in the hierarchical order that we see of the international system. How are they going to continue being that one? If you're going to be helpful and then trying to have cordial relations, be assured that the Chinese will take over. Chinese will continue to rise much beyond what we imagine about. And on the other hand, how you will continue to be on top, but then allowing also others to be that way. So that's why I said it's going to be an issue of certain amount of commitment that's coming loaded with some amount of morality and ethical thinking, which is only a cover that the United States used for a very, very long time, because great speeches also don't make great nations, or it's not going to be greatly helpful with regard to the economies. So from that perspective, how they are going to manage multilateralism and multipolarity will be the crux of how the world order is going to get shaped, is what I want to say.
Thank you, Dr. Parulekar. Thank you, Dr. Kishore. So in crux, the ending statement would be multilateralism, and we just speeches won't help. So with this, we end our today's discussion on post-Trump era, how the world order will be. Thank you, dear friends. Thank you for your patient listening. Thank you, Dr. Parulekar, for accepting our invitation and helping us out to understand the complexities and the complex issue. Dr. Kishore is always with us, and he has been our guiding force throughout. Thank you, dear audience. With this, we end our today's session. We have overshot by 4 minutes. I'm extremely sorry for that, but I hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you